Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Sukalis bringing you a recap and a takeaways from a game we were not expecting to have to recap in the format that we're about to, because Alabama's SEC championship games have gone goodbye in Norman, Oklahoma. The Crimson Tide stunned, shocked, embarrassed. I don't really know what the right adjective really
All
is.
of those work. Yeah.
All of the above. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, in Norman, Oklahoma, losing 24-3 to the Sooners on Saturday night. We're obviously bringing this to you on Monday, so we've had some time to kind of digest the loss, and we're going to kind of talk about it in that context. Is just thinking about this game and looking, how does Alabama move on, and sort of looking back at it through the lens of a little bit of time rather than an instant reactions. But Tony, I will just ask your perspective first, and then we're going to just dive right into it. I mean, you were there. You were at Norman, Oklahoma. You were on the field when those people accidentally stormed. What was it? Too early. They had to.
Yeah.
They had to get them off the field, and you were in attendance. I mean, how shocked were you to watch this performance unfold? First and foremost,
this felt like the worst parts of both the Vanderbilt and Tennessee game, right? So the defense couldn't get off the field, and the offense just couldn't get anything done. You had the offense from the Tennessee game and the defense from the Vanderbilt game, and you just couldn't get anything done. It was miserable from an Alabama perspective. I mean, I can't imagine being an Alabama fan that traveled all the way to Oklahoma and watched that game. That must have been just the worst. But this is one of the worst Alabama games, the worst I've seen Alabama play in a long time. And when you consider the level of competition they were facing, it makes it even worse. I mean, I've seen Alabama get just shellacked. I remember the Clemson national championship game with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, that was they had no hope. I mean, they came out pretty strong, and then just it evaporated. You kind of look at the last time when they played Oklahoma in 2000 and what was it? Was it 14 in the Sugar Bowl? That was pretty much a beating. You don't really get this many just absolute beatings where just Alabama had no chance of winning this. I think people call the Texas game a beating. Alabama was, lost by 10. I mean, this was just getting taken, to the woodshed against a bad Oklahoma team that was just hurt and couldn't throw the ball. And you looked at this team, there's no way. Yes, there was a chance that Oklahoma could upset Alabama because they had a good defense, but not. I would have bet my house. I don't have. I would have bet my rent on Alabama not getting blown out in this game. It just seems so bizarre to me that they've lost to a Vanderbilt team, they've lost to an Oklahoma team. These are just losses that are just unfathomable from an Alabama standpoint. I know things are different now, but even so, you look at this performance and you think, how did Alabama lose this with the talent they had, with the injury shape that Oklahoma was in? And this is an Oklahoma team, Jack. Their only SEC team before this was Auburn. They had to win on a fluke play. Oklahoma could have easily went winless in SEC play, and it's just that now Alabama's playoff hopes are pretty much down the drain. I mean, I wrote a column about how they have a shot, but it's just kind of it was surreal almost. That's all I was. It was really just a surreal feeling just watching the same Alabama team that we saw play so well against LSU earlier this month look like a shell of itself.
Yeah, and that's honestly a good point to go off of. First of all, I agree with you from the surrealness. Even watching on the TV, you just kind of couldn't believe this was the performance you were getting. I would have almost expected some of it to be like a voodoo game in the Iron Bowl, where this sort of thing happens, where somehow Auburn just conjures some magic. I mean, Alabama will be at home for that game, and we'll get into that at the end. But I would have almost expected it with the history of that game, and not Oklahoma. Oklahoma was a team that everyone kind of saw them breezing past. And like you said, have all of these hopes for college football playoff, for the SEC championship game. Go read Tony's column, by the way, if you really want to get into the weeds of how Alabama could maybe still make a run to the CFP, because they were a part in what was a chaotic day in the SEC. So
that's true. Yeah.
Nobody
wants to make this playoff. I've said it before. Expanding the playoff to 12 games is stupid. There's never been a time when 12 teams deserve to make the playoffs, and there's just not going to be. 12's just too many. 14 will be even more too many. It gets to a point where you shouldn't be allowed to make the championship. It's not, you're not a playoff team at this point. There's not going to be 12 playoff teams, like playoff worthy teams, and
Well,
that's why I make it.
that was most of the response I saw to your column was just, I don't even want
Oh
this.
yeah,
It's
Alabama
not gonna
fans
happen.
didn't want. Yeah, I wrote a column, and I kind of wrote it almost tongue in cheek of like, and I said it in the opening few paragraphs of like, you don't read this column. Basically, I was basically begging you like the everyone not to read it, because like it's hope, I guess, but at the same point, you look at this and you're like, do you even want Alabama to make it? The comparison obviously I made in my column was kind of like, if you have an old dog that's like ready to go, and just you don't want to take that trip to the vet, but the dog's aching, he's crying, and it'd be easier on him. It's like somebody needs to put Alabama out of its misery, because this is going to happen again in the playoff. And I know we're an Alabama podcast, so can't get too negative here, but at the same time, like, is there anything you've seen that I could see Alabama playing really well against Auburn. I could see them possibly making the playoff, maybe winning a first round game, but they're going to come across another situation like this, and you fool me once, fool me twice, fool me three times. You're not going to fool me a fourth time. I don't see Alabama moving on. I think this team's way too flawed to make it through a playoff.
Well, and the other scary thing is the teams they encounter in the playoff are as good, if not better, than the best team it's lost to, all season in Tennessee. I mean, they were kind of seen as sort of on that fringe too, and after the chaos are more firmly in. But yeah, I can't even imagine against a more quality team.
If you have a decent running game and a good, maybe has to be great. Oh, because Vanderbilt, and a good pass rush, you can beat this Alabama team. You have a good chance that Auburn can beat Alabama. People were saying that early on in the season, and I was kind of like, oh no, they can't. The game's in Bryant-Denny Stadium, and it's just that the talent is way more on Alabama's side. Look, Auburn has the makings to beat Alabama. Auburn's not that different than Oklahoma is. They're going to have a good defense. They've got plenty of talent. They've got a quarterback who just needs to get hot, that can run the ball. You talk about like Jackson Arnold. That's the only thing he could do is run the ball. Well, Peyton Thorne can run it. Like Peyton Thorne can do what Jackson Arnold did against Alabama. There's nothing special about that. And he has way more weapons to do it with. And you got a rivalry game. Like Alabama comes out and plays like that against Auburn, they will lose like that against Auburn. It's not even like they could lose. They will lose, and it will be bad if they play like that. I think Oklahoma and Auburn are very similar teams. In fact, I think Auburn, in a lot of ways, is better than Oklahoma. They got the nation, the SEC's best running back. They've got a slew of talented receivers. Cam Coleman's looking good. Peyton Thorne is not a good quarterback, but neither was Jackson Arnold. So if that obviously doesn't matter to beat Alabama, I know he's like a darling to a lot of people, but I don't think Diego Pavia is a great quarterback. I don't think that Nico Iamaleava is a great quarterback right now, at least. So it doesn't take a great quarterback to beat Alabama. You need a running game, and you need to pressure Jalen Milroe, and he has proven that he hasn't progressed from that. I think you can make the argument, and we're kind of getting really on the dark negative side, but maybe we need to, that I don't think Jalen is as good of a quarterback right now as he was at this point last season. The way he's playing right now is not as good as the way he was playing at that point. That's damning. But this is one of the worst performances that I've ever seen from an Alabama quarterback, and any Alabama quarterback. A lot of them get yanked before a lot of them don't get to four quarters. It's hard to be as bad as Jalen was and play all four quarters. But yeah, I just it's bad, and who knows if it can get worse, because you don't know about this Alabama team. They could be great. They could blow the doors off of Auburn, or they could legitimately get blown out by Auburn. Like it's scary to say, but they really could.
Yeah, it's damning stuff. And I think, we're going to dive into some of the things we saw against Oklahoma that, like you said, have further established the trends and the things it takes to beat this team. And I want to start kind of from the top, Tony, because we've talked with Kalen DeBoer on Monday, and, obviously you talked with him after the game, and you kind of talked about, some of the road stuff. And, he mentioned, I'll just read the quote. He said, "We didn't have that momentum that you need. We went into an environment and we let the environment be what it was. We didn't grab a hold of it like we did against LSU, and it kind of took over the place. We let them hang around through the first half, uh, and they got the score at the end of the half, made a couple plays. And they also said it wasn't like I felt like we needed to make more adjustments. It was just we made a couple of mistakes that swung the game. Do you kind of agree that it was the game kind of went down to not burying Oklahoma after, you get that early turnover, you put some points on the board? Do you kind of agree with that, or were there adjustments you wanted to see made, whether it was offensively or defensively?
You know, I think I'm thinking with a lot of I'm kind of side with a lot of the fans of just, some of those Jalen runs seem forced. But then again, I don't know if if that's necessary. Do you kind of need to kind of get Jalen going through the ground to kind of get his game up? I mean, there's the thing about Jalen is that he's so good when everything's going right, but it kind of takes a lot for everything to go right. And so, yeah, it's easy to say like you need more traditional runs and you need to, but like, is part of Jalen Milroe that you have to kind of get him going through his legs to get his arm going? And is that like something you just have to work, into the game plan? And if it is, then I mean, that's, you just kind of got to get it done. So you can't really blame Nick Sheridan for that. On the flip side, it would be nice to see more traditional runs. I sounded like Justice Haynes was limited, so maybe that's also some of the reason. It kind of felt like Alabama was handicapped, whether it be through Jalen and his limitations, or maybe the run game being banged up. But as far as adjustments go, I'm not really sure. I can't really answer that without kind of knowing what Nick Sheridan's working with, because I really don't know anymore. I don't know if Jalen is good enough to do everything that he needs to do with his offense.
I guess I'll broaden it more kind of long term then, and we won't want it. We'll try to be rational. Obviously, it's fair. We're fans of sports too. We've all been irrational sports fans at times, and we'll try to keep it that way. But when you look at DeBoer and you start to evaluate, and obviously he's got one regular season game to go, what concerns you? I mean, long term, like I think I hear a lot of these conversations about personnel, and it's, oh, he needs to get his own fit, and eventually he'll have his own players. But is there stuff from a coaching standpoint that you've seen this season, and maybe especially in this game, that can emphasize that maybe concerns you long term as DeBoer, obviously tries to bounce back from this and have a better season next year?
Yeah, and I don't know. It's really easy to put this all on the board here. So, like, when
Mhm.
I say this, I'm not putting it all on the board. This is one of the most mentally soft teams I've covered. I've been on the beat since 2016, so I've seen a few Alabama teams, and this is by far the weakest, the most mentally soft team I've covered. So whether that's DeBoer stepping things up, whether that is he kind of handcuffed by a lot of these guys were loyal to him. Does he have to kind of like repay that loyalty? Is he trying to just find his footing at Alabama? And he it's one of those things like, do you need to kind of get your feet on the ground and kind of build up you know your culture instead of it's really hard to just a lot of people when they talk about replacing Saban, it's the expectations and the standard that you have to live up to. But it's also I don't think that was a problem for Kalen. I think more of what's difficult in taking over this job is everything was done a certain way, and if that's not your style, it's not only do you have to change it, you've got to get people to take your way serious. You know what I'm saying? And that if you're used to having strict parents and the next parents aren't as strict, well, if you raise a kid one way and you're lenient, then you've done a lot of things, and that kid gets raised a certain way that like he listens to you because that's the way he's always been raised. If you adopt a kid that had strict parents and all of a sudden parents aren't strict anymore, and you don't have that built up of all the stuff that you built into your players and the style and the culture that you built in, then yeah, you could have some problems there. And I think that, I mean, if you're talking about players being upset about environment or worried about non-controllables on week 11 after they've already lost twice, after they've already gone to, Tennessee and Wisconsin and LSU. Like, what are we doing? Like that's, I think it's almost to a certain, from this season standpoint, it would be less scary if it was like, man, Sheridan called an awful game, or man, Womack called an awful game. Like, I don't necessarily think they did, a lot of it, like, it was execution. But that would be less scary than just the fact that these kids can't handle these, it's week 11 and these kids, still can't get out of their own heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you really should, and not to say that Alabama can just walk off the bus and beat someone, but like, they really should have been able to handle this Oklahoma team with, a lot of things going wrong and still been able to handle it.
Yeah, and I asked that too because I feel like we've been hearing, we heard it after Tennessee, we heard it after Vanderbilt, we've already heard it after Oklahoma. DeBoer says he likes the way his team is prepared for the game and he thought they've gone in with the right mindset, but that's a really hard thing to believe when then you see what the product is on the field, and then it's, if it's okay, these players were in the right space, then is it on the coaching? And you just said, I don't think that Sheridan or Womack is solely blamed for this loss. So where does that blame fall? It's sort of hard to pinpoint when you hear what DeBoer says versus what you see.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question with this team, and I just don't know if this team has a lot of talented parts. I think it boils down to, it's just not a Kalen DeBoer team yet, and I think you can make it work, but I don't necessarily know that Jalen Milroe is a Kalen DeBoer quarterback. It's not to say he can't coach a running quarterback. I mean, obviously, if they beat Auburn, they're 9-3. You know what I'm saying? And they still have a chance. Like, it can happen. Is it ideal? Is this the team? Is this the everything the way Kalen would have built it if he would have built it for 4 years? I don't think so. And I think it's just really hard to kind of just come in and kind of implement your style with somebody else's, with a lot of somebody else's team, and then also do it on such a big scale. You can come in and maybe you could do that in the Pac-12 because you're such a great coach and because you do know what you're doing. This is not me saying that, like, Kalen DeBoer is. I'm not really trying to bash Kalen DeBoer or say anything bad about him right now. It's just so hard to do what he's doing, and sometimes you just got to deal with what the players you have and how much can they pick up their system. And I've been harsh on Jalen on this podcast. Like, Jalen's a great quarterback and a quarterback that can make a lot of plays, and at his best, I just don't know. He hasn't shown the consistency. So, like, I don't think Jalen's a bad quarterback, but I don't know if he's consistent enough to win a title. And that's the problem, because he doesn't seem like he's progressing in ways that you need. And so, like, what do you do with that if you're DeBoer? You know what I'm saying? It's not like you're kind of stuck and you're kind of handcuffed in what you can do on offense. And then on defense, I think this whole team, you're kind of hoping from an Alabama standpoint that you could rely on the offense to carry the defense. And a lot of times this season, it seemed to be the other way around. And this team is not really built for that. So when you get into situations where the defense needs some help, I don't know if the offense is always there to give it. And I think that's the problem. So, I mean, I think when you start getting, I think DeBoer has shown me enough to know, like, I don't think he's a bad choice. I think when you look at how hard the situation he came into was, I think a lot of times we don't even give him, you can say, oh, it's hard to step into Saban's shoes, but I think that there's always that undertone of, yeah, but you're coaching a Saban team and it can't be that hard. You should still go to the playoffs. You should still be, I expected them to be 10-2, and I still think that they, probably should be a 10-2 team. So anything less than, every loss from there, I think is a little bit of a knock to DeBoer, in my opinion. But on the same hand, he's not that far off from 10-2. I think he's done a good job. I think you're going to see improvement in the years. I think when he gets more, a full off season with his team, he's able to implement that identity a little bit more. I think it's going to work. It's worked so many different places, and it's worked to a certain extent in Alabama. I just think that it's just too tough. And I think the more it becomes Kalen's team, I think the more you're going to be able to truly see what he can do with it.
I completely agree, but I think you're right about with this team specifically and trying to dissect some of the things that make it flawed and have made it flawed and made it flawed on Saturday nights. So, I think you're right along the lines there. And you mentioned we've been harsh on Jalen Milroe. I'm gonna, I guess, ask you to be harsh on him again because we should dissect his performance. You mentioned it was one of the worst performances you've seen from an Alabama quarterback. He was 11 for 26, 164 yards through 3 interceptions, 15 carries for 7 yards. I'll ask you the maybe the easier one, maybe the harder one first. What was Oklahoma doing well from your observations to kind of limit him? That maybe is similar from what you saw from Vanderbilt and other teams. And then, yeah, I mean, on the same lines, I mean, he's getting in his own way a little bit as well.
Yeah, they were able to bottle him up and kind of eliminate those running lanes, and then they were able to pressure him. And he's just not a quarterback that really steps up well off of the pressure. I think when Jalen escapes pressure, his focus is totally on escaping. Like he he's not a guy that can step past pressure in the box or step up in the box. It's something that he had worked on, and that's something I don't think he's no longer good at that. I think he's maybe even getting to the point where he's like, I think at one point you're seeing him a little bit progress. I think he's now regressed in that. And so if you pressure Jalen Milroe, especially now, I mean, I think that it can, you can really affect him. You can force him into some bad decisions or just force him into, holding onto the ball too long. So I think that's probably the biggest thing they did. And then, he just also didn't have a great passing game either. He had a few drops, but so I mean, could his receivers have helped him out a little bit? Sure, but I mean, I still think I still think a lot of it was on him, and just a bad game mixed with a good game plan and just kind of the right ingredients when you talk about that front seven and what they can do.
Yeah, I think just to add on with what you said, and then I want to ask you about the pick six. I mean, I thought Nick Sheridan had an interesting thing where he said a lot of it, like you were saying, was a lot of that pressure, but then he also was running, laterally at times a little bit too much, and he thought some of that stuff was kind of forced. And you talked about that at the top too. They were kind of forcing him in some of those runs, and yeah, it never really got clicking. And it's so weird because I think similarly with the defense, and we're going to talk about that unit too. It seemed like he hit on those two big third down throws at the start of the game to set up that first field goal drive, and those were both good intermediate throws that he was able to make. Ryan Williams nearly turned one of them into a touchdown. It kind of felt like it was okay, one of those games, and there were some drops and stuff in there too, but yeah, I think I agree. It just was a lot of self-inflicted wounds as it kind of went on, and that sort of culminated. I mean, in the pick six, obviously he throws the interception. Oklahoma is set up in really good territory. They go score, and then the very next possession throws a pick six, and then I don't think we can not talk about it. The effort on the tackle. I mean, this is a 6'2", 225-pound athlete. Just kind of, I think you put
It
it
looked
best.
like it looked. I think
Yeah,
a lot of people are saying that he like pulled up or didn't want to like kind of like faked a dive. Or really, if you look at his right leg, it looks like he's trying to like slide tackle him like a soccer player.
mm-hmm.
Like he was just trying to trip him. Which I mean, you mentioned it. He's bigger than the Oklahoma guy. I mean, if he would have just pushed him, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't. It looked like he could have gotten there. Just use your force and your momentum. All you have to do is push him out of bounds. It didn't. You're not asking him to make a form tackle in the middle of the field. I mean, it's just push him out of bounds. And you see kickers do that. You know what I'm saying? So that was I don't know what went through his head.
To me, it was kind of just the cherry on top of the performance. I mean, and I
It might
don't
just
think
be a case of like he thought, like he's just not thinking. It's not a situation he practices,
right.
So
DeBoer
it's not
said that on
a
Monday.
situation, yeah, it's not necessarily something that he's a situation he's in a lot. So maybe he thought like, oh, this is a defensive guy and I'm not a tackler, and if maybe my best chance is tripping him, Um, but he's also not a soccer player either. So I don't know. I think it would have been a lot easier to push him out of bounds. I really don't. I kind of like to know what was going through Jalen's head. I think as a fan, you probably think, geez, you got this first round quarterback or this potential first round quarterback, and is he just trying to make a business decision? Is he not giving his all or something? I think a lot of the hate Jalen's getting on that play is probably stemming from people who are having those thoughts, right? Of, is this guy not giving his all because he's trying to protect his body instead of, laying it out on the line for the team.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's no way to tell if that's the case.
Mhm.
I can only tell you I looked at the play. It definitely does look like he is trying to stop him with his leg somehow. That's all
Yeah.
you can judge. Like you can't get inside someone's head. You can't you speculate. It's unfair to do that. I can just tell you the play. I would be surprised if he wasn't trying to make a stop with his legs.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It looked that way, and yeah, it just again, it kind of felt like the culmination of just this frustrating game that ends in, man, all you have to do is push a guy out of bounds and can't even do that, and it's just this snowball and snowball and you know, sort of
Yeah,
a
Pro Football Focus didn't give him a tackling grade, but it would have been low.
it would have been low on one attempt. And just before we move on to the defense, and you had mentioned it. I mean, the regression. It is concerning. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. From just, I don't know if he is the consistent enough player to lead a team to a championship, and it's unfortunate because of how much talent we know is there and how much talent Alabama fans know is there, and I think that makes it all the more frustrating because you see it, and when you see it, it's quite literally unstoppable. He's the best athlete on the field, but it just doesn't seem to have a consistent enough factor. I don't know if you just have any more kind of final thoughts on Milroe as he, obviously tries to bounce back from this.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much bouncing back. I think you try to have you try to bounce back in the Iron Bowl, and then I'm not convinced that he'll play in the bowl game if Alabama doesn't make the playoffs. I personally don't know if it's good on both parties if he does. I think maybe you kind of want to see what you have with some of the other quarterbacks, but Jalen's always been a guy that's really kind of like he wants to do the right things to be a leader. So I could see him playing in the bowl game just to send a message, and I think that would be from a precedent standpoint. You saw Bryce do that. I think you kind of I get the mindset where you want to have your veterans continue that. You know what I'm saying? And um, he probably has some proving to do to NFL scouts. It definitely doesn't want that to be the last taste he leaves in their mouth. But as far as Jalen's concerned, I expect him to have, unless Alabama makes the playoff, 2 more games with Alabama. And if actually, to be honest with you, if Alabama makes the playoffs, he might have 2 more games with Alabama anyways. But I think he's going to go pro. I think he's I don't know if he's ready, but I think it's probably smart for him. You look at this quarterback class and you look at some of the stuff that Jalen Milroe can do, and he's going to kill the combine. I think he's going to do really, really well. He's got a lot of tools. He's got a huge arm. He's got a elite speed, Lamar Jackson level speed. And there's going to be teams that are going to want to take a stab at him. And I think there's a player in there too. But if we're talking about this year in Alabama right now, and if they somehow made the playoff, that I don't think he can do it. I don't think that makes him a bad player. I just don't think that he has the consistency and the completeness to do that. I'm not saying that he'll never have that. But I think he's kind of a little bit of a ways from that. I think if he's a guy that if he goes to the NFL, I would not expect him to start right away. I think he needs some time to kind of really mature on some of the just the non-physical, but like the mental part, the understanding parts of the game, and like I said, I think he's there, I think there's a player in there. It's just right now, I don't know if he's a title winning quarterback. I mean, it's hard to say that, Jack, because like they could have really won the title last year. He came close. I mean, like there are, if you wanted to get into the Doctor Strange Marvel world, there are, possibilities where I'm not saying you cannot win but you're probably not going to win. Your chances of winning a title, especially in an extended playoff format, are very slim with a quarterback as inconsistent as Jalen Milroe. Alabama is a 3-point shooting team in basketball that doesn't do the other things well. And like, so, when
That's
they're
too real of a comparison, Tony. I don't think I can let that slide.
not like a Nate Oates 3-point shooting team where the metrics, it's like, they live and die by shooting up threes. And if they're hitting, they'll blow you out. Like the threes were hitting against, LSU, and they were clinking against Oklahoma. You got to have something else to rely on. And right now, Alabama doesn't have. If Jalen Milroe's not doing well, they don't have that other thing. And he's too often not doing well.
Tony's talking Marvel basketball. This loss has just put his brain in a pretzel. We've fully gone off the deep end here on Tide Illustrated, just trying to process this. No, I completely agree with you. I think it's just a level of consistency he has to find. And yeah, I think everyone's kind of rooting for him to find it because, my goodness, he is a special player.
He's a fun player to watch.
It's really fun.
He's a really, I hope he clicks in the NFL with some team just because I like watching Lamar Jackson play. You know what I'm saying?
And there's a leadership aspect of it too, where, he's a good kid. He clearly cares and is dedicated to his teammates and to his team succeeding. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a classic case of the poor, sometimes I think we all could use this advice at times. Poor kid's just got to get out of his own way some of the time. Just let it be.
It's tough. I mean, and he's had a lot of, pressure on him, and he's been in a lot of situations. Like, I could see a case where, he goes to a team, he's got to find the right situation. But if he goes to a team where you can kind of learn off of a veteran quarterback, if the Browns weren't so tied up in Deshaun Watson, I don't know if the Browns are going to pick, but I could see, you talk about a team like the Cleveland Browns where you maybe could learn a year off of, I don't want him necessarily learning off Deshaun Watson, but can you imagine him learning off a guy like Jameis and those two personalities, and you get those leadership, but also getting to see how a guy like that who's made it in the NFL as a mobile quarterback. I mean, obviously Jameis is not an elite NFL quarterback, but he's a capable one. He's making a living out of it, and right. If Jalen Milroe was able to learn behind a guy like Jameis, which is kind of funny because we're talking about, a player that had ties to Alabama. And so Jameis Winston's not necessarily the favorite player of Alabama fans, but having him, learn behind a Jameis Winston or something like that, I think would be really fun to watch, but it has to be the right guy, right? It has to be the guy that could kind of take Jalen under his wing and really kind of have him tap into some of that stuff.
I think Jameis Winston would just give him one of his ever classic speeches, and Jalen would just be instantly, that speech might just change his whole world. I don't know.
Imagine being a beat writer though, and going from getting Jameis Winston's just epic pregame speeches to Jalen Milroe's coach speak. That'd be the biggest drop off in terms of media. But maybe Jameis,
I think bring it out of him.
We just automatically now have Jalen Milroe going to the Browns. We've already talk about different scenarios. I was just picking a team that I thought would be.
We'll revisit this pod in April, and obviously we will have plenty of NFL draft coverage for all the Alabama players that kind of pursue that, because that is fun and enjoyable to see those guys make it. But yeah, it's super interesting. I think it's the Jalen Milroe experiment will be fun in the NFL, and yeah, like we said, hopefully it pays off for him. But it's just struggle bus right now. Good thing Norman, Oklahoma does not have an NFL team, because that is maybe just not his place. I want to ask you about the defense briefly, Tony, and then kind of turn things to the Iron Bowl quick to end things off. Defense, particularly on the ground, Oklahoma absolutely gashed Alabama. You mentioned Jackson Arnold had a huge game. The defense allowed 260 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Jackson Arnold looked a lot better, really, than he has for a large part of the season, particularly running the football. So I just want to ask, I mean, how much of this loss is on this defense? Because, of course, Oklahoma blew out Alabama, but they didn't score 50 points. One of the scores came on a pick six that the offense throws, that one of their other touchdowns came on a short field. But, of course, the Sooners still had an excellent day on the ground. Arnold, 131 yards. Xavier Robinson, the running back, had the 2 touchdowns at 107 yards. And obviously this defense didn't do enough. They lost the turnover battle. Didn't do enough there, which is their whole point of emphasis. And the whole thing Kalen prides his team on. So how much of this loss do you think falls on the defense, and how worrying of a performance was that for you?
It's a good thing they don't have to go against a mobile quarterback and an elite running back again this week. But I say that in jest for people who didn't see the video.
Go back to the beginning of the podcast.
But yeah, I think some of the third down stuff. You kind of reverted back to some of the previous problems. And the crazy thing was, Alabama stopped Oklahoma, I think, on its first 3 or 4 third downs. So, I mean, it was shaping up to be it looked like the defense was going to handle it. It's just, I think part of it is mobile quarterbacks give this Alabama team some problem. And if you look at it, they've struggled a lot with mobile quarterbacks. And so I think, you can fix some problems, but a lot of that's discipline. And, they haven't, it's the same thing with Jalen. It's like you have all these, problems that you can fix occasionally, but can you fix them consistently? That's kind of what I was asking Kalen DeBoer, in my question today. Is just what, it's just what makes this Alabama team so inexplainable. I mean, Alabama's defense has enough talent and enough, it's not like Jackson Arnold is some, even the Jackson Arnold that was playing against Alabama, which was really good on the ground. I mean, it's not like he had a great day. He wasn't moving the ball through the air. Alabama has, the defensive line. It has the linebackers. I know Deontay Lawson suffered a season-ending injury during that game, but, you got Justin Jefferson's a really good replacement for him. And then Jahad Campbell's an absolute, elite college player. So, I mean, you have the players to stop a running attack. It's just staying disciplined. And I know this option offense is kind of tough to handle, but I mean, you've seen it before. You should be ready for it. You had the players to do it. It's concerning, but I think a lot of it is, it goes back to the beginning of the pod. I think this defense was always supposed to be good. I don't think this is an elite defense. So when you're asking the defense to kind of bail the offense out, and then also, you mentioned the offense is now causing problems for the defense. I don't think this is an elite defense. I don't think it's an elite, pass rush. I think that's something that, Alabama's had to kind of overcome, and they just don't have that elite pass rush. I think, Quay Russaw could probably turn into that, but he's not that quite now. And so I just think that, a little bit of it is, maybe should Kane have adjusted better to that? I think you got to put some of that on him, but I think a lot of it too is just execution. And really, I think this defense kind of is what it is.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think it's a good, not great defense that got caught in some bad situations that isn't quite good enough to drag Alabama out of the hole that it put itself in with some of the offensive issues. So
this defense plays better when its offense is playing well. It's like this defense also can almost ride. It almost needs a little help from the offense. You know what I'm saying? But when it comes down to, I don't see this defense winning a 9-6 game. It's just, it's never gonna. If the offense is not scoring, it's gonna eventually break.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. Jahad Campbell can only play so many roles. I think they're gonna
own him and just have 11.
They're gonna toss him at corner at this rate. I mean, my goodness, I feel like I see the guy at a million different positions, which would be great for his NFL draft prospects too. We talked about that with Milroe. I think that guy's gonna make a team really happy. But
I don't know if he's gonna be a first round pick because I haven't seen him totally mocked there, but I wouldn't be surprised. And he's one of those guys that I think it's gonna probably come down to like how does he test in the combine, right?
Sure.
Yeah, he's definitely has the leadership and has the the production, to be a pick. I think it's gonna come down to like what does he run, what do they like in his drills and stuff like that. But if he can impress people there, I think he could shoot up boards because you look at what he can. He passes all the eye tests, and then I think we've seen him behind the scenes. He wasn't a team captain, but he almost kind of feels like a team captain. Like it's almost like you got to like remind yourself, like, oh yeah, Jahad's not technically a team captain, but he's definitely like one of the leaders on this team.
Yeah, he imposes his will, I think, is the way I would describe it. And look at us. I mean, we're already leaking into draft talk because we're just so we have to be ready. We have to refocus our brains because of this loss. And it's a good segue too, because this is a good point to finish. And, you kind of asked Kalen DeBoer about it, I know, on Saturday after the game, and he was asked some questions, of course. I mean, the season is not officially over, because you have a big game, one of your biggest games of the season every single year coming up. A 4-game winning streak over Auburn, Alabama has coming into the Iron Bowl. Kickoff, by the way, for that 2:30 ABC. You can watch it. It's a huge game, and after a loss like this that is so damaging to your potential postseason hopes, I mean, there is a lot more outside noise and stuff that can leak in. So, I ask you, I mean, how does Alabama get kind of reset and continue? I know you asked Tyler Booker about kind of that 1-0 mindset, and Kalen DeBoer kind of talked about it as well. I mean, what did they say about just getting reset, and how hard is it going to be to try and get refocused? Because you beat Auburn, at least you can still end, like you said, 9 wins, and on a high note, you get the one up over your rival.
It's going to come down to what is this team made of, and the story I wrote after the game was, Jalen Milroe sounded very robotic as usual in his answers to the media, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he says to us. People like Jalen Milroe, people like Tyler Booker, they're going to have to fire up these players and really kind of take this team by the back of the neck and make sure that they don't collapse. I mean, you've seen, teams like it's a different situation, right? But look what happened to Florida State after they suffered some adversity and their season fell apart. They just totally quit and they've become a laughing stock. I think if you look at this season, it's going to come down to how much pride do you have? I mean, it's a big rivalry game, and to be able to go for a lot of these guys, your whole career never losing to Auburn, that's a big deal. That's hard to do, and so that should mean something to these players. And ending it on it's going to be senior day for some of these guys, and obviously the Iron Bowl rivalry is, in my opinion, the best rivalry in college football. But if you don't think that, it's still probably a top 3, no matter who you ask, right? So it's a big deal beating Auburn. The playoffs aren't, I wrote a whole column about it. The playoffs aren't necessarily over, so you can kind of ride on that. But I think there's a huge difference in being 9-4 or 9-3 and 8-4. I think the 8-4 it got as bad. I had always said at the beginning of the year, 8-4 is as bad as this team could get. And so when you look at it, you see 8-4. I think you really change the way you view this team. And 9-3, you look at it, even if they don't make the playoff, you look at it and say, well, gee, this team is just kind of it was a weird team, and it could have went farther, but at least it got 9 games, and maybe they'll win the bowl game and get to double digits. That's another thing. Alabama since 2017, so we're they've won double-digit games, the double-digit wins in every season except the following, since 2007 when they went 7-6. So can't lose again if you're going to have that, So I think that's another thing to follow. Does that team want to, continue that streak? It's a pretty impressive streak. And one that I didn't think was going to fall. But, if you mess around and you lose to Auburn, obviously they'll have no chance of having those double-digit wins.
Yeah. There's a lot on the line still from a kind of a legacy standpoint. And obviously, from what we've heard all season long, DeBoer, that is going to be the message. The focus is going to all be on Auburn, and you're going to try and rally the troops. And it's going to be the biggest challenge to do so, I think, of any of the other losses that we've encountered, because it feels like there's little to play for, and you've got to get these guys thinking that there's a lot more to play for against Auburn. We'll obviously have coverage all week of that over on Tide Illustrated. We'll have a ton of recruiting stuff for that as well, building up to signing day. So we'll have a ton of recruiting content. So go over, subscribe to Tide Illustrated for all that. Basketball content too, of course, the men's basketball team in the Players Era Festival over in Las Vegas. I'm going to end on a fun note, Tony, and a quick basketball note. We're recording this on Monday. Alabama plays its first game against Houston on Tuesday. They play Houston, Rutgers, and then one of San Diego State, Creighton, Oregon, or Texas A&M in the Players Era tournament. They'll find out that opponent on Wednesday. Give me a prediction for how Alabama goes in their 2 games against Houston and Rutgers, and which of those 4 teams do you think they match up with?
I think so. They have 4 games. I think they might go with. They're guaranteed 3. Not 4.
Yes.
I see them probably going 2-1. I could see them losing a close one to Houston, then coming back and winning the next two. But I don't know. I feel like I've been negative enough, and this Auburn beat Houston, and maybe and I think if we talk about Alabama having the best roster, you know what? I'm gonna say that they're gonna. I'm gonna go ahead and give them those 2 wins, and we'll just
Okay.
see. I'm not gonna predict. It's hard to say that they're gonna sweep a tournament like this. They definitely have the possibility to do so. But actually, looking at it, I like them against Rutgers, and then Houston's gonna be a big test. But I mean, this is a good Alabama team, and so it's kind of like not used to picking Alabama in games like I'm still getting used to Alabama being a powerhouse in basketball. But I'll tell you what. I think they are going to win. I think this is a big statement win. They kind of lost that era of invincibility when they lost to Purdue. But they came back, and I thought they played pretty well against Illinois. And so I think I like their shots against Houston, and so I'll pick them to go 2-0, and I guess I'll have to wait to see what the next matchup is going to be.
Who do you want them to play of those four? We've got some interesting ones in there.
Give me those teams again.
It is.
I don't want another repeat, so take out Creighton, right?
Okay, so if no Creighton, it would be, I guess, technically Texas A&M. You could take them out because they're going to play.
Yeah, I wouldn't want another repeat there.
So Oregon or San Diego State?
You know what? Give me, just who do I want in terms of like being
just for fun? Yeah, just for fun.
San Diego State, right? This is the team that like ruined their their number 1 overall seed. I think it'd be kind of a neat. I like building up those. Creighton's almost become like an Alabama rival because they played the postseason. Maybe this creates a little bit of a San Diego State Alabama weird rivalry in some aspects. Maybe Alabama can get some redemption. That'd be a nice little story arc to see if they played. Obviously, totally different teams, but I think that'd be kind of fun to see. So yeah, San Diego State.
I will say Oregon for a goofier narrative because they played Oregon in a tournament last year, but no one could watch it because it was only being streamed on flowhoops.com. I remember this.
Flow Hoops, yeah.
Yep, and no one was able to watch it. You had to buy a subscription. So the Oregon game, everyone forgets they played Oregon last year. It just kind of got swept away. So maybe we get a televised Oregon game. So I'll predict them as who they play. I'm gonna say 2-1, but I think it's a loss to Houston.
I was gonna do that, but then I just don't want to
No, I appreciate it. They very well could beat Houston.
It's really hard to go to. I said that they're gonna win the first two, and then lose to San Diego State would be like the worst out of those three. So to say that they're gonna lose to that, I mean, maybe I'm just like speaking with a little bit of optimism right now from a friend of Alabama's standpoint.
Why not?
But I mean, like they do have the best team, so roster wise. I mean, if it clicks and they've had some time to kind of gather themselves. I don't know. Yeah, I feel good heading into this tournament from an Alabama perspective.
Houston and Alabama will be an excellent basketball game. Rutgers and Alabama is probably going to feature 4 first-round picks potentially in it because Rutgers has 2 5-star freshmen who are going to be probably top 5 guys. And then, yeah, San Diego State, you get the recap narrative, all that, or the rematch narrative, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You have a look of confusion. The 4th-round pick I'm implying is LeBaron Philon.
Okay, I was gonna say yeah. I knew you were doing Reed as one of them, and I was like, "Who's the other?"
I observed. I've got.
I was just trying to do the math in my head, and I was like,
he's played like a first-round NBA draft pick. I'm gonna call him one until he proves me otherwise. So there you are. There's a fun way to end what is otherwise a grim outlook for Alabama football, but plenty to still look forward to from a fan perspective, just enjoying the Iron Bowl and enjoying the Iron Bowl week, which you should do on Tide Illustrated. So go subscribe there, subscribe here on the YouTube. We will have a preview of that game on Friday. Until then, we'll see you next time.